Today is Super Bowl Sunday. Today is Super Bowl Sunday. Thank you for being here. Today we'll feature two of the best teams in the world, the big halftime show and $1 million commercials. Last night I came across one of those commercials that I felt led perfectly into my sermon. And I wanted to share that commercial with you so you don't miss out on at least one commercial from the Super Bowl. Here you go.
What you don't know about your garage door will kill you.
It's official. You can't eat wheat bread.
Someone's been stealing packages.
They call them porch pirates.
All I'm saying is that in 5 years, robots will be able to do your job.
Are you listening?
Always, Denise.
In a world full of fear,
Simply Safe on.
home is the place you should simply feel safe.
This evening I would like to preach on the second freedom that FDR gave in his speech, freedom from fear. Freedom from fear. Now at the beginning of the sermon, I'd like to clarify that there are some fears that are good. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is a good fear. There are also some fears that can serve as a healthy function in our lives. For example, fear is the appropriate response and reaction to a burning building. Fear is the appropriate response to a growling dog because it creates mechanisms in our lives that we need. Fear itself is not sin, but fear can lead to sin. Meaning if we medicate fear with things such as angry outbursts, drinking binges, Netflix binges, sullen withdrawals, self-starvation, vice-like control. What we are doing whenever those fears arise in our lives is we are learning to exclude God from the solution and exasperate the problem. And fear has a way of turning us all into control freaks. Because fear at its center is perceived loss of control. At the center of fear is a perceived loss of control. When life spins out of control, we begin to grab and grasp for the components of life that we can manage. We begin to think, well, I can manage my diet. I can manage the tidiness of my house. I can manage people. Fear and faith, however, are battling for the same spot in our lives. There are many reasons to be fearful in today's world. Your job may be talking about layoffs, or you may be worried about slowdowns in the economy. Maybe you're worried about the flare-ups in the Middle East. Maybe there's turnovers at work, downturns in the market, upswings in global warming. There are real fears born out of legitimate concern, a fear of public failure, unemployment, or heights. The fear that you'll never find the right spouse and you'll never enjoy a good health. The fear of being trapped, abandoned, or forgotten. We fear finishing last, going broke, being sued. We fear being the new kid on the block. We fear the sound of the clock as it ticks closer to the grave. We sophisticate investment plans, create elaborate security systems, legislate stronger military, yet we depend on the mood-altering drugs more than any other generation in history. Children today are more fearful than psychiatric patients in the 1950s. We live in a world of fear. Over the past few weeks, every cable news station has been covering the presidential impeachment. You pay attention to it a few moments, and you'll begin to believe that it is the end of civilization as we know it. And y'all all know it's true. I made the mistake last night of about 1 o'clock this morning of getting on Twitter and reading comments, and people literally think this is the end of the world. I was like, let's forget Hamilton and Burr going over to Jersey to shoot it out. Politicians aren't doing that. Or when Andrew Jackson decided to fire literally everybody in Washington, bring on his friends, and create a meltdown. But this is the end of the world, right now. The world is ending. And donate $20 to my presidential campaign. Tomorrow, the polls will open in Iowa and presidential primaries are going to kick off. And the way it's looking, the one who sells fear the best is going to win. Because fear sells pretty good. It's the end of the world. Vote for me and I'll stop it. And donate $20 to my campaign. We live in a world that is full of fear. After the 2008 election, those on the political right began to scream, it's the end of the world. After the 2016 election, those on the political left began to scream, it's the end of the world. The reason why this fear from both political sides is so adamant is because fear sells, fear is marketable, and fear moves people. It's almost as if we have convinced ourselves that Jesus schedules his calendar around our political elections. It's true. We will find prophecy in every single political election. But did you know that in our short American history, political parties die? Are there any Whigs in the House? Federalists? No. Because they panned out. They fizzed out. It's almost, like I said, that fear has convinced us that Jesus schedules his calendar around our politics. And some in our world are even convinced that Jesus takes sides. Because there is enough, if we look at it objectively, there is enough in both political platforms, Republican and Democrats, there's enough of Jesus for both of them to claim Jesus. They find just enough. Both of them. I'm throwing them both under the bus right now. But Jesus is not concerned with the Republicans' interpretation of the law. Jesus is not concerned with the Democrats' interpretation of the law. Here is what Jesus is concerned with: you knowing his law. Because Jesus does not take sides. Jesus takes over. Jesus is not concerned with right side and left side. Jesus is concerned about who's on the Lord's side. Jesus is not concerned about your political differences. Jesus is not concerned, do you lean left or right? Are you elephant or donkey? Are you Democrat or Republican? And we have allowed this to become a division in our world. And if we're not careful, it can become a division in the church. And Jesus' last prayer, the great high priestly prayer in the book of John, was make them one as we are one. Make them one as we are one. It's almost as if he saw he saw coming down the road the potential for division. And he says, if there's anything I need my church to be, it's united. It's united. Jesus doesn't take sides. Jesus takes over. Jesus did not come to overthrow human law. Jesus came to overthrow human heart. It wasn't until Christianity took a stand that slavery was deemed a right, an inalienable right, common. And then Christianity steps in, and the law of Jesus steps in, And I'll say, hey, wait, maybe it's not. Because Jesus didn't come to conform into the law. He came to overtake the law. There was actually a time in history where parents would take their babies, and if they didn't want their babies, it was legal for them to take them and put them on the outskirts of town or on the outskirts of the woods and walk away, and they weren't responsible. Survival of the fittest. And so Christians at around 4 BC, right around the beginning, after Jesus had already died and resurrection, Christians would go out to the corners and take in the children and take in the babies and begin to take care of them. No one said they had to do it, but they had this new law. They had a new law that overtook man's law. They had a new law that overtook, and it was the law of Christ. And it says, bear ye one another's burdens, thus fulfilling the law of Christ. He told his disciples at the end of his life, he said, there's a new law that I'm going to give you. And not just love one another. He said, I want you to love in such a way that it reflects me. And that whenever they see you, they think of me. One thing. He said, this is the one thing I want you to get. Love one another as I have loved you. Don't just love one another. I want you to love one another as I have loved you. He took it to a much deeper level. Jesus did not come to overthrow the human law. He came to overthrow the human heart. Because the sin issue is a heart issue. Jesus did not come for you and I to live in fear. Jesus came for you and I to live in faith. Can peace and fear exist at the same time? Can clear thinking and being afraid happen at the same time? Can you be confident and afraid, merciful and afraid? No, because fear is like the big bully in the high school hallway that's brash and loud and very unproductive. For all the noise that fear makes and the room that it takes, it does little good in our lives. You see, fear has never written a symphony or a poem. It's never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear has never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear has never saved a marriage, and fear has never saved a business. Fear didn't do it. If it happened, it was faith that did it. Imagine your life untouched by fear. Imagine a life with no fear. Can you live fearless? Can you live fearless? This is the possibility behind Jesus' question in Matthew 8:26. Whenever he asked his disciples this question, what are you afraid of? This was Jesus' question to his disciples. What are you afraid of? At first glance, we wonder if he's kidding. Is he serious? Like the swimmer that asks another swimmer, why are you wet? Jesus doesn't smile. Neither are the men to whom he asked the question. This came out of Jesus getting into a boat with his followers, and a great storm arises on a lake, and waves come over in the boat. And in Matthew's words, he remembered well the bouncing boat, the incredible waves, and he begins to write not just any word to describe this storm. The word tempest is only found 2 other times in Scripture. In the Greek, it's called seismos. Seismos. The term still occupies a space in our vocabulary today. A seismograph. A seismologist, the one who studies earthquakes, or a tool, an instrument to measure earthquakes. And Matthew, along with his crew, in a seismic earthquake that shook them to the core. He uses this word on only 2 other occasions. At Jesus' death at Calvary, the earth quaked. And at Jesus' resurrection, the graveyard travailed. Apparently, the storm that the disciples were in carries equal billing to the trilogy of Jesus' great shakeups. Defeating death on the cross, defeating death in the tomb, and silencing fear in a storm. Sudden fear. The storm springs out like a lion of the grass. One minute the disciples are enjoying their cruise, and the next minute they're gulfing seawater. Peter and John, the seasoned sailors, struggle to keep down the sail. Matthew is a tax collector. And this is a little more than he bargained for. Do you sense the surprise in the way that he merges two sentences together? It says Jesus got in the boat with the disciples with him, and a great storm arose on the lake. You would think it would be one of great joy. Hey, Jesus got in the boat, and there was great joy. Jesus got in the boat, and there was a wonderful rainbow that came over the boat, and everything was just happy, like a Disney cruise. Because Jesus was in the boat. Because isn't that what happens whenever Jesus gets in the boat? Everything turns great. Whenever Jesus gets in the boat, life is just absolutely perfect because we have Jesus now. There's no more problems because Jesus is here. There's no more stress because Jesus is here. Jesus is in the boat, and so our little wooden boat has now become the Disney Cruise Line. Is Jesus and Mickey Mouse on the same boat? Isn't life great? That's what happens whenever Jesus gets on the boat, right? It's like the Alaskan cruise. No. The story is a not so subtle and not too popular reminder that getting in a boat with Jesus means getting soaked with Jesus. Disciples expected rough seas and stout winds for the world, but now they have Jesus. Christians, just like others, contract malaria, bury children, battle addictions, and face fear. Just like everyone else in the world, we face the same things. The only difference between us and the world is not the absence of the storm, but is who we discover in the storm that sets us apart, an unmoved Jesus. The things that sets us apart in a storm, whenever it arises, is whenever we find Jesus. When the storms of life happen, we have a confidence that Jesus is with us. Jesus is with me. Jesus is for me. Jesus is in me. And there is nothing that can take away Jesus from me in the middle of a storm. Whenever the storm arises, I know that He's in the same boat with me because He said, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. Jesus is right there with you every step of the way. Jesus is there. Jesus is still there. Jesus is still there. What are you afraid of? You know what bugs us though? Even though we know Jesus is there? This is what Jesus is doing in the boat. Jesus is sleeping. Come on, Jesus. There's a scene for you. The disciples scream and Jesus dreams. Thunder roars, Jesus snores. And He doesn't just catnap, and He doesn't just rest. No, He slumbers. How can you sleep at a time like this? How can you snooze during the loop-de-loop on a roller coaster, Jesus? How in the world do you sleep during this wind tunnel? Jesus sleeps through it all. The disciples come to wake Him up. And I want you to notice the question that they asked in Mark chapter 4. Look at the question that they asked Jesus in Mark chapter 4 and 38. Do you not care? Do you not care that we are dying? They go get Jesus up. Jesus, don't you care about us? Jesus, you don't care. I'm in the middle of the storm of my life, and you don't care. Don't you care that we're dying? Don't you care that there's sickness? Don't you care? Don't you care? Don't you care? They do not ask Jesus about his strength. Can you still the storm? They don't ask him about his knowledge. Are you aware of the storm? They don't ask him about his know-how. Do you have experience with storms? But rather they raise doubts about Jesus' character. Do you not care? Because isn't that what humanity does when you don't get what you think you should get? Instead of considering the competence and fear, we attack the character. Fear does this. Fear corrodes our confidence in God's goodness. We begin to wonder if love actually lives in heaven. If God can sleep in our storms, if his eyes can stay shut when our eyes grow wide, if he permits storms after we got on his boat, does he really care? And fear unleashes a swarm of doubt, a swarm of anger stirring doubt, and it turns us into control freaks. Do something about the storm, Jesus! Do something about the storm, or else. Fix it, or else. Fear releases the tyrant inside of us. And in the deadness, it kills our recall. The disciples had reason to trust Jesus. By now, they had seen him heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. They had witnessed him heal a leper with a touch and a servant with a command. Shouldn't someone mention Jesus' track record or review his resume? Do they remember the accomplishments of Christ? Fear creates a form of spiritual amnesia. It makes us forget what Jesus has done and how good Jesus is. And fear feels dreadful. It sucks the life out of our soul and drains us dry of confidence and even competence. We become abandoned homes, rickety from the wind, a place that humanity used to eat and thrive and find warmth. But now fear shapes our hearts and our lives. Safety becomes our God. And when safety becomes our God, we worship the risk-free life. And no safety lover can do anything great. No risk-averse can accomplish noble deeds, neither for God nor for us or others. The fear-filled life cannot love deeply because love is too risky. The fear-filled life can't give to the poor because benevolence has no guarantee of return. The fear-filled life cannot dream wildly. For fear of failure, the worship of safety is above all else. No wonder Jesus wages such war against fear. No wonder the number one command that Jesus ever gave was fear not. Jesus' question is a good one. He lifts his head from the pillow in the stern of in the middle of the storm, and he asks this question. In Matthew 8:26, he asks the question, "Why are you afraid, O ye of little faith?" Why are you afraid? Fear may fill our world. Fear may fill our world, but it does not have to fill our hearts. Fear may fill our world, but it does not have to fill our hearts. And just because it knocks on the door doesn't mean you have to give it a seat at the table. And just because it knocks on the door doesn't mean that you have to give it a bed to sleep in at night. Don't invite it in for dinner and don't offer it a spot in your home. Instead, remind yourself that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. God has more for you. But you can't grasp it in a state of fear. It can only be taken in a state of faith. Instead, now, I'm not preaching tonight that fear is not real. I'm just offering you another option. One that says, I'm in the boat with Jesus, and I believe at the end there will be peace. You can choose fear or faith. You can choose prudence or paranoia. Left unchecked, fear has a way of metabolizing into obsession, because the step between prudence and paranoia is very short and steep. Prudence wears a seatbelt. Paranoia stays away from cars. Prudence washes with soap. Paranoia avoids human contact. Prudence saves for old age. Paranoia hoards even trash. Prudence prepares and plans. Paranoia panics. Prudence calculates the risk and takes the plunge. Paranoia never gets near the water. Author Jim Collins, in his book Good to Great, tells the story of Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war for 8 years during the Vietnam War. Stockdale, after his release, Collins asked him how in the world he survived 8 years in a POW camp. He replied, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into a defining event in my life, which in retrospect I would not trade. Collins asked him, who didn't make it out? He replied, oh, that's easy. The optimist. Not really the answer that I thought he would say. The optimist didn't make it out. They were the ones who said we'd be out by Christmas. And Christmas came and Christmas would go, and they were still there. And then they would say we'd be out by Easter. Easter would come and Easter would go, and we're still there. Oh, we'll be out by Christmas. Christmas would come and Christmas would go, and they were still there. And then they died of a broken heart. You see, real courage is embracing two realities: your current difficulty and your belief in your ultimate triumph. Yes, life stinks, but it won't last forever. As one man said, everything will work out in the end. Everything will work out in the end. If it's not working out, then it's not the end. Everything will work out in the end. But if it's not working out, then it's not the end. It's okay to avoid excessive optimism. It's okay to avoid excessive optimism. But we also must avoid being Chicken Little. Let me put it like this. Whatever your political belief is, I'm using this just as an example, it can be of anything, whatever your political belief is. If your party is currently in power, don't live too optimistic, because it swings like a pendulum. There's going to be a day when your party is not in power anymore. If your party's not in power, don't be all Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. Because there's going to be a day where your party is probably going to be back in power. And you want to know why? Because it swings like a pendulum. What you need is not to be the extremes of the pendulum. What you need to do is be wide-eyed, yet unafraid. Don't have blind denial, and don't have blatant panic. Be a level-headed follower of Christ. Undeterred. The calmest kid on the block. Not for a lack of the storms. Not for a lack of the storms. The storms are coming. The storms are going to happen. The sickness is going to happen. The opportunity to be fearful is going to happen. But rather, we find our confidence in the one who's in the boat. I was in 8th grade. This is it's kind of a funny story, but so I was in 8th grade. My brother was in 10th grade. I rode the bus. He did not ride the bus because I was in junior high and he was in high school. I was fine on the bus until we went to the high schooler, because there were some high schoolers got on the bus and one of them was a bully. And there was a day that I got in the bully's crosshair. And I just got in his crosshair, which is not a place that I wanted to be for 4 hours on a bus. I was the last person to get dropped off. And then, don't know what happened. I never said anything about it, but my brother found out that I got in the bully's crosshair. And like I said, I have no idea what happened. I have no idea whether it was a conversation or more than a conversation. But all I know is that from the next day on, I was still on the bus, the bully was still on the bus, and I had free reign to sit wherever I wanted. Like I said, to this day, I have no idea. I don't know that I want to know. But I do know this. Whenever I got on the bus, I walked with a new confidence. I had a little bit more swagger than I had before. And it had absolutely nothing to do with me. The only thing that changed was the bully found out who was in my corner. He found out who was for me. And whenever I realized that he realized who was for me, it changed my entire perception. What makes us fearless is not the absence of the problem. What makes us fearless is not the absence of the enemy. What makes us fearless is whenever we realize that our enemy realizes who is for us, and if God is for us. And if God is for us, who could be against us? We walk in a world of pain, and we walk in a world of horror. We walk in a world that wants you to be scared. But whenever you realize that your enemy knows who is for you, it changes the way you think, and it changes the way you act, and it changes the way you live. It changes the way you live. It changes everything. Because I began to use, I only did it once, but I began to use the fact that, oh my goodness, almost every bully at that school scared half to death of my brother. I began to use it to my advantage. And there was one time I really pushed it over the edge. I exerted myself a little bit too much. My brother backed me up. He did. He didn't have to. He backed me up. But whenever he got home, he took care of me too. Never forget who is for you. For God has not given us the spirit of fear. There's a stampede of fear out there. But you don't have to get caught up in it. Let's be among those. Let's be among those that know how to stay calm in a storm. Every storm needs a calm. You be the calm. Let's recognize danger, but not get overwhelmed. Let's acknowledge threats, but refuse to be defined by them. You see, courage doesn't panic, it prays. Courage doesn't languish, it listens. It listens to the voice of God calling through Scripture. 2 simple words: fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not. And I thought it would be appropriate to end this sermon talking about the 4 fears, the 4 freedoms, with another quote from the same man, Franklin D. Roosevelt, after the attacks of Pearl Harbor, said, "We have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear but fear itself." We are more than conquerors. I refuse to live with a mindset of fear. I refuse to live with a mindset of worry. I refuse to live with a mindset of paranoia. I refuse to live in a mindset created by a world that wants to control me with fear. He defeated fear in the boat. He defeated death on the cross. And He gave us new life with His resurrection. The 3 seismic shifts of Jesus. Fear has no hold on you. Death has no hold on you. The grave has no hold on you. So the first question that I asked this evening, that Jesus asked His disciples, I ask you, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Courage over fear. Faith over fear. Not because of anything we've done, but we just know who's for us. Why don't you stand with me? Everything's going to work out because Jesus is still in control. Because Jesus is still in control.